Hello and welcome to the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast for HR managers and business owners, where we talk about workplace wellbeing to make everyone's lives better, including yours and mine. I'm Stephen Pink, CEO of Verve Healthcare, and my guest in this episode is Katherine Walker, who is former director of Shell, now a psychotherapist and leadership coach, and very recently published author of Step Up, Step Parenting and the Art of Creating a Happy, Healthy and Blended Family. Katherine, welcome.
Thanks ever so much, Steve. It's lovely to meet you, and thanks ever so much for inviting me to be a part of the podcast. I'm delighted to be here.
And thank you very much for joining us. We're keen to have you on for a number of reasons. Your book talks about healthy, happy families, and of course, Verve is about healthy, happy workplaces. This kind of got us thinking about the links between home life and work life. Can you tell us your view of how one impacts the other, please?
Sure. Well, I think it's really simple. Who we are affects our environment, and our environments affect us. Like, the two are inextricably linked. So when we show up at work, we're bringing a little bit of what our home life is to bear, either very consciously or without even realizing it. And often when we go home, we're bringing a little bit of how work may have impacted us back to our family or domestic life. It's impossible to separate, really, because we show up in both environments. But ultimately, we can't control our environments. What we can be more aware of is how we show up in those environments.
So when you think about a workplace, I guess it's tempting for HR managers to think that, what happens at home is none of your business, what happens there stays there. And I suppose they're right to an extent, but how can they play a positive part in all that?
I think it all comes down to culture. I think HR have a huge responsibility when it comes to the formation of the culture in the workplace. You're absolutely right. People, and I guess this is a key message in my book, and it's a key message in my sort of professional practice on a day-to-day basis, that we all have a huge responsibility to ourselves and to show up in a healthy way and as consciously as possible. But ultimately, HR, as well as the leadership in an organization, are accountable and responsible for creating a culture where all employees can thrive and be at their best. I think it's really helpful if HR teams can recognize that actually the workplace often replicates a family environment or a family group very unconsciously for people. So as an example, the workplace is littered with authority figures, for example, our bosses or team leaders, who often unconsciously replicate the role of parents or primary caregivers. And so if we've had a terrible experience with our parents, when we go into the workplace, almost we can be expecting to have that experience in our earlier life reenacted in some way. Equally, our peers in the workplace show up like our siblings might have done in a family environment. Do we get on with them? Do we not? What do they represent to us? And so on and so forth. And so we've talked a little bit about authority figures being represented through our bosses. We've talked about our peers unconsciously reminding us of our sibling relationships. But also the same is true for people in our teams who may replicate in some way how we treated younger siblings or how we related to younger siblings in the household. And then, of course, if I think about the books, Step Up, we can think as well how that might be replicated in the workplace too. So with threats that come on board. So in the domestic environment, that might be a step parent. Are they going to like me? How are we going to interact? How are things going to change now that they're here? And in the workplace, that might be somebody new that joins or a new CEO that comes on board. How's the culture going to change? Is my job going to be safe? Do I still belong here? Can I still be me? Are my colleagues going to remain the same? And so on and so forth. So, we can see here that the HR do have a really important role to play when it comes to developing the culture of an organization. And what they can also do is help those in leadership, and in fact anyone employed in the organisation, to create a little bit more awareness of how they might be showing up and how their previous dynamics might be affecting their performance in the workplace.
There's a real lot going on for people, isn't it? So you don't stop to think about it sometimes. And I suppose it's true in a family setting as it is in work. Sometimes we hear the term masking, where perhaps someone acts in a way that others around them, they think they're expected to act, or how, they think they have to fit in. I guess an example could be someone struggling with something outside work, but putting on a brave face when in the office. When you sort of think about that kind of scenario, what's your take on that?
I think masking is inevitable. I think we all do it. We have so many different aspects to our personalities and our characters, and whether we like it or not, we're following lots of different social codes all the time. How should I speak with this person? How much should I share with that person? Can I really be myself? And so on. And so, and we're always thinking about, well, what information is relevant? Which parts of my character are appropriate to sort of convey or share in this particular setting, whatever that might be. So I think the first thing is that, we all mask. It's a way of filtering ourselves. And if we look a little bit deeper at the psychological kind of underpinnings of masking, we're looking to be accepted. We want to belong on a very, very deep level. We're looking to conform to our environments to some degree.
So without thinking about what you've said there, so without kind of, betraying any confidences, have you seen some examples where that's been an issue, and maybe kind of what happened? How did it pan out?
Well, I suppose I can definitely talk at a thematic level, and it's the sort of thing I would have witnessed, kind of in my former career, and it's the sort of thing I deal with all the time in my current career. So I guess, if we sort of acknowledge that everyone masks to some degree, I guess the question is like, why is it an issue? And I think firstly, there are many who would say, I don't mask. I'm not masking. I'm completely authentic. I'm my authentic self. And when I hear that as a psychotherapist, it rings some alarm bells, not maybe big alarm bells, but it does ring alarm bells, because what it denotes is a little bit of a lack of self-awareness. And I think for us to sort of show up as consciously as possible, we need to really think about, what are the parts of my character that I want to show here? And what are the parts of my character that I might need to leave at the door because it's not appropriate for whatever reason? So if we are sort of kidding ourselves that we are 100% authentic all of the time, ultimately it denies us an opportunity to really think consciously about the best parts of us that might actually be very welcome in a professional environment that we may previously have thought may be unacceptable for some reason. And I guess when we think about the whole self, we're thinking about, different parts of our character, some of the things that we might want to sort of, refine the edges of, but we're also thinking about the things that we really love about ourselves. And for us to be, I suppose, as psychologically healthy as possible, all those different parts, need to be brought to consciousness, and they need to be integrated. So when we have a part of our character that, let's say, through a childhood or a prior experience, we somehow come to think of as not wanted or unacceptable. Sometimes, let's think of a really easy example here. Introverts. If you have an introverted character, often in the workplace, people think that that's not acceptable because the majority of characters in the workplace may be a little bit more extroverted in nature. But of course, the introverted characters are the ones that typically sit back a bit more, are a little bit more reflexive. They might have honed really, really good listening skills. And so without sort of really owning their introversion, they might other it. And what that means is that they might try and behave in a very different way to their natural character. In this example, they might try and behave in a much more extroverted way. And then it's blindingly obvious to all around that they are trying to be someone that they're not. And so in their desire to be sort of authentic and to fit in, they end up standing out like a bit of a sore thumb. Whereas if they just kind of embraced their introversion and thought about what are all the ways that this part of my character is actually additive to the environments around me, like my workplace, it might actually stand them in better stead in the longer term. And I guess it's sort of, when we're not aware of all parts of ourselves, can also rob the organisations that we're a part of an opportunity to see and benefit from some really valuable gifts that we may be able to bring to the workplace. And I think Finally, a common theme that I come across is when people do mask a lot and very actively, and they try to hide lots of parts of their characters, they end up feeling really lonely and isolated often. They're sort of hiding so much that in fact there's fewer and fewer and fewer parts of their character that they actually do think are acceptable, and so as a result they don't open up, they share, they become a lot more guarded, so on and so forth, to the point where often people will say things like, I don't even know myself anymore, how did I end up here? And then if you're in that position, then it's really difficult to show up in a way that's additive to the environment around, because that sort of lack of self-esteem, that lack of confidence, lack of self-worth will inevitably get in the way of being able to do that, which is a shame.
It is. I'm just thinking about, we're trying to ask a slightly different question, kind of build on that. I guess, that's a lot to take in, particularly if you're someone that kind of struggles with that balance between authenticity and doing what's accepted, as you were describing. If someone was starting in a new job or a new department, and that's a kind of almost an opportunity to refresh or something like that, what advice would you give someone that wanted to kind of really kind of get this right for themselves, if that's the right expression?
I think personal development work is always additive, one way or another. It's additive to self, it's additive to the groups we're a part of, it's additive to the organizations we're a part of. So I think if someone finds themselves either being promoted into a new position, or finds themselves in a completely new environment, I would always advocate, because what we're talking there is about change and transition. So I'd always advocate for somebody to embark on a bit of a chapter of personal development, whatever that looks like for them. I mean, unsurprisingly, I'm going to always say a therapeutic chapter or a coaching chapter, something like that. Even if it's simply a case of reading a sort of self-help type book or a leadership book, and sort of trying to sort of see yourself through the pages that you read. What am I really good at here? What of this stuff is new to me? What of what I'm reading now is scaring me? And what are the opportunities for me to sort of grow? So there are many different ways that people can tackle their own self-development. Also seeking feedback from the previous environment, previous bosses, the HR teams, seeking feedback from peers, from colleagues, from family members. So there are many, many ways to sort of achieve that goal of getting to know yourself a little bit better. And I guess the second thing is, rather than just focus internally, which is I think where I've just started, it's then to do the exact opposite and to look externally. And what I mean by that, Stephen, is if you're about to join a new team, or you've been promoted, or you're joining a new company, understand a little bit about the team that you're about to be a part of. Where can you fit in? What can you bring that is really going to be needed, or is going to bring a sort of a different set of qualities or strengths to the team that might be lacking today? And then think about how you might need to sort of flex to be part of that environment. And then thinking a little bit more broadly as well, if you're joining a new company, let's say, or often people move teams within organizations, and even though it's run by the same company, team one might look very, very different to team two in terms of its culture. So I would always recommend that people transitioning roles or organizations to really take a good look at the culture that they're about to walk into, so that they get a bit of a heads up on, again, all these things that we're talking about. What's acceptable? How can I shine? How might I need to flex? And how can I contribute successfully to the environment that I'm about to walk into?
I think one of the things I like about what you're saying is the way you describe it makes something to be quite scary for people, feel quite not straightforward, but easier to get your head around when you're going to a new environment. You mentioned a bit about development and perhaps self-help books and things like that. Coming back to your book, Step Up, and thinking about your work in leadership development, what would you say are the essentials for HR managers and employers to kind of embed at work so that we get a great space for a healthy and happy people to thrive?
Well, I think that I'll turn to my sort of previous answer, but I'm just going to think about it very specifically through the lens of HR now. So when I was talking about, knowing yourself and personal development, I think that's a really, if I was an HR manager sort of developing a bit of a strategy now, I think about, well, how can I develop a pillar that is designed to support the personal development of the employees that work in that particular organization. You know, what programs do I want to make available? You know, what chunk of the budget might be appropriate here? And this is, when we're saying personal development, it's really important to remember that it's always going to directly benefit the organizations that that the people who are receiving the personal development are working for. Because ultimately, you know, teams, and we'll come back to teams in a moment, but teams are made up of individuals. And if HR teams can run specific programs or bring external consultants or experts in to partner with people, let's say a cohort that might be moving from taking a step up, so moving from a sort of an individual contributor position to a managerial or even a leadership position, by running programs that can support those individuals and help them to look a little bit more broadly. Let's look at developing your signature leadership style. What's your relationship like with conflict? Because now in this new position, you're going to be perhaps having to deliver some difficult conversations or embark on some difficult conversations, let's say when it comes to the annual performance cycle, or to deliver feedback to somebody midway through the year. So whatever HR can do to invest in the individual development of the people in the workforce is going to be additive. And I think going back to maybe one of your very first points about bringing kind of home life into work.
Yeah.
And I do agree that to some extent, some stuff needs to be taken care of by the individual and needs to be sort of dealt with separately. But ultimately, you know, we're all people, aren't we? And if you are carrying a great big weight into work because you're going through a really difficult time at home, you're not going to be able to get your job done effectively if you feel like you can't share, you can't open up. Sometimes when people are really going through something, they just need a supportive ear for a few minutes. And that might make the difference between them needing to go home at lunchtime or actually being able to sort of get their head down because they feel heard, respected, listened to, and deliver some great work despite, you know, starting off on a really difficult foot. So individual development, really important. Second of all, and I'll just try and keep this brief, but I mentioned kind of thinking about the teams that you're about to be a part of. So I think HR, going back to that strategy, thinking about, okay, how can we address the team development? Yes, they're made up of individuals, but groups of people take on their own energy. You know, you'd be familiar, you know, teams in the workplace, oh, that team's a really loud team, that team's really unstable, that team do really, really great work, we want to be a part of that team have a really great manager or leader. So teams develop their own sort of micro cultures, which HR teams in short can sort of help to sort of foster and build. And then I think the third point I was making was just this kind of be prepared to flex, you know, what's acceptable, what's not. And I think that within that, it's good communication. So people get really, most people have a very difficult relationship with change. Some people embrace it, most run from it, and it can be a little bit change averse. Change means insecurity for many people. So when an organization naturally has to pivot, change, new people are coming in, HR can really lead the way with really clear communication that's delivered regularly to help people feel safe, so they know exactly where they stand. And all of that good communication will contribute to a positive culture and create the happy workplace and environment that we're talking about today.
Brilliant. There's so many ways to look at it, so many perspectives. You know, we talked about the individual's own action plan, things the HR and the business leaders can do. So if we sort of come back to your book a minute, that's out now, and it sounds like there are lessons in there for blended teams as much as blended families. And I'm taking from our conversation that creating an authentic workplace, particularly what you're saying latterly there, gives space to be honest with ourselves as well. You know, things that we might have to open up to ourselves about before we're ready to open up to our colleagues about in a kind of, you know, managed way. So we can put some of those masks away. We've covered a lot. So as we wrap up the podcast, are there any sort of specific final thoughts that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think it probably comes back down to culture. Like never underestimate the power of culture, and investing in it. And I remember from my own sort of corporate days that, you know, the word culture and culture is key. Like they are spoken all day, every day, but often, and this is the difference, often they feel a little bit more like lip service than actual reality. But a really kind of solidly embedded positive culture, whatever that means, for any organization, is really going to be the difference between whether people feel safe or unsafe, whether people feel that there are clear boundaries that they operate within, or whether people feel like, you know, anything goes, which sometimes is good if that's part of your values, but often if you're running an organization with many people, you need your teams to be sort of galvanized and lined up and all pointed in the same direction for the best possible results. So kind of clear direction, really important. And then I think as well, a really kind of solidly developed culture doesn't just benefit the employees that already work in the organization, but it also acts as a bit of beacon of attraction for anyone else that may want to join the organization. You know, is this something I want to be a part of? We talked a little bit throughout this session around feeling safe, but as HR managers, you know, you want your employees and your workplaces to feel motivated to deliver success over the long term. Often tenure and turnover is a big problem for lots of organizations. And I guess the best way to build long-term motivation is rooted in people feeling like they have a clear purpose to live up to and to deliver on, and for people to feel that they belong. And guess what? To belong, we need to feel safe. So, you know, developing that culture is absolutely critical, and certainly isn't a sort of airy-fairy buzzword that can just be talked about, ticked off and put in a drawer somewhere. So I think, yeah, focusing on culture would probably be my number one recommendation.
That's loud and clear, and certainly I think I'm going to try and have a go at doing things a bit differently on the back of this conversation. Katherine, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for being so open with us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me to be a part of it, Stephen.
Well, thanks very much for being part of the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast from Verve Healthcare. If you'd like to improve wellbeing in your workplace through access to mental health support, physiotherapy, private GP services or health assessments, then we've got a solution for you. Just visit us at vervehealthcare.co.uk and be sure to subscribe. Thanks and see you soon.